Okay, anytime you want to start, be ready.
Are you ready?
Yep.
All right, we will do this. Now, this is my Uncle Carl, and my name's Wallace. Now, Carl happens to be the fellow who's the head of this family. And he's almost the last of Grandpa Leif's children. There's one who happens to have a birthday this very day, and that's Aunt Florence, but she couldn't get here. So actually, this is the day, this is Memorial Day. This is the 28th of May, 1990. So that anybody around will have the answer to that. Now listen, yesterday we presented to Uncle Carl this piece of work, which is the genealogy of the Kunkel family, 1990 edition. And whenever he gets tired of carrying this around, well, he says he's going to give it to the Historical Society of Holt County. Now, when we did this yesterday, inside of it, there is a chart having to do with people before us, and there were a lot of questions, and we're trying to answer those questions right now. So, Carl, we're not going to go into this because this is very specific. We just want to say that this exists, and if you can't see it at Uncle Carl's, anybody can see it up at the Historical Society. I think it's in Fairfax, right?
Anybody wants to come to my house can sit right down and bring their book up to date, the same as this.
Right, right. Okay, well, we'll take this sequence and drop it. That's right.
Oh, okay. Well, Kristen, why don't you tell them that you want to do? No, you don't want to. Okay. Well, Gary, why don't you do the talking?
I'm behind the scenes. Skip this.
Okay.
It's running.
Oh, it's running? Okay. We're doing this so that we can pass down generation to generation the story of the Kunkel family. And this is Kara Kunkel. She's 10. And this is Kristen Kunkel, and she's 14. And this is their friend Chrissy Buck and another cousin, and she's 10 too. They're gonna be back.
Give me back here.
Yeah.
Pick up Karen and Kaylee later. Okay.
All right, are we going in this? All right, now, I wish this chart were bigger, and I wish you could read these words much easier. But the first thing I want to do, while this whole thing looks confusing, I want to simplify it. You may have gotten the idea yesterday at the reunion that this chart goes for every Kunkel in the world. It does not. It does not at all. Look here. If one of these people over here, and I'm going to read some of these names, Byron Lee Kunkel, Chester Kunkel, Mary Ann King, do any of those names sound familiar to you? Did you ever hear of Chester Kunkel? He doesn't happen to be your grandfather now, does he? Right? Okay. Well, all of these here, there's Nida Messick, that's Carl's girl, Carla Kay, that's his. Now we got Byron and Chester and Mary Ann and Twyla. These are all cousins right here. This one right here is myself, Wallace Marks Kunkel. Now do you know Mylan Boswell and Wayne Boswell? Do you know them? Sure you do. Okay, now does this begin to make sense to you that we all live right here and we are all the sons or daughters of these people over here? Now, if you can find in this list somebody who is your grandfather, and I'm saying this for any person maybe 100 years from now, how do I know? If one of they can say that their grandfather was Carl Kunkel, or Nellie Peters, or Harold Franklin, or Mark Chester, which would be one of my kids, any of these, this chart is for you. But it is not for anybody else. And I'll tell you why. Because your great-grandmother's name, or your grandfather, was Leif Kunkel, and he was married, you follow the arrow, to Annie Ammonia Jackson. How do you like that name? Annie Ammonia Jackson. Well, I knew her very well as Grandma Annie. So, if you can claim that Grandma Annie Kunkel, Lafayette's wife, is your grandmother or your great-grandmother or even more than that, this chart, anything on it you can claim. If you are not one of Grandma Annie's, but your name is Kunkel, it don't mean a thing. Because everything that happens on this chart happens to Grandma Kunkel. So, why?
Make this as an example.
Yeah, is that right?
She won't know.
All right, I see this. Okay, well, I don't know quite enough about that to make the example, okay? All right. So we get this is our little world over here. Right? Well, that's fine. But this big book that I had out here really is the whole world of Kunkels and all the people that they married. But they don't belong to Grandma Annie. Now look here. Annie Jackson's mother, see this line, was Catherine Delicia Parsons. That was her mother, just like you've got a mother, just that simple. Now, we knew her as Grandma Kate, and she was a wonderful little lady who always carried a Bible around, and she was short, and she would sit up on her kitchen table, and she'd dangle her legs, and she was just a nice lady. But now look, Catherine Jackson had a father, and his name was Marcus Parsons. Okay? Now, Marcus Parsons came from way up in Syracuse, New York. I've seen it up there. It's beautiful. It's like a painting up there. Marcus Parsons. Well, now, Marcus Parsons in the same town married, see this line here? He married a lady called Elmira Melpomena Dewey. Get that? Okay. Now this strange name here, Elmira Melpomena, happens to be the great-grandmother of any of these people that are over here. Remember this ugly guy here just a couple of minutes ago called Carl with that big book? This is his great-grandmother. And this one in here is my great-grandmother, because I'm a generation under Carl. So we're talking about the real family here. But I'm gonna tell you something now. Elmira Melpomena came from a very strange family. Her father was a circuit-riding preacher. Now that means that he traveled on horseback, and his job was to save souls. I mean save souls. And he was up in New York State. Actually, the town was called Pompey Hollow. And it was near Casanova, New York, which is near Syracuse, New York, which is up toward the Great Lakes, all right? Well, this guy rode this horse all over New York, Vermont, a piece of Pennsylvania. I mean, he was out going through the trees and happening into a little group of people, and they would have a get-together, and he'd save some souls. In fact, this gets so strange, there is a book in the New York Public Library called Little Maid of Vermont. I don't know who wrote it, but it tells about Reverend Timothy Dewey and his partner, his preaching partner, who was a young by the name of Lorenzo Dow, D-O-W. And they were in Vermont riding around on horseback, and they came upon a batch of lumberjacks. These are guys who cut down trees and all kind, you know? And one of them was so unhappy, he was swearing, he was cursing. He had lost the head off his axe. He had swung real hard at a tree, the head had come off, and it had fallen into a stream. And that book says that Reverend Timothy Dewey, he knelt down by the wheel of the wagon that was in the camp, and he prayed. And do you know that the head of that axe floated on that water? That's a fact. It's in that book. Well, you know, those people up there, they didn't drink Pepsi-Cola all the time, let me tell you. There's something about that I don't believe. Now, look here. Now, we're just going to leave Reverend Timothy Dewey alone over here with all his kids. Now, do you know what his other kids' names were? The brothers and sisters of Carl's great-grandmother? Look here. One of them was named Anna Diadema. Another was Philander Seabury. Another was Franklin Jefferson. Arminius Philadelphus, Marcus Bonaparte, Pleiades Aristarchus, Victor Malenus, Octavia Ammonia, and Encyclopedia Britannica. How do you like that?
I like that.
Well, you see, Reverend Timothy was a very learned man. He read a lot. And just about 3 or 4 years before Encyclopedia Britannica was born, and they called her Britannia for short, he got himself a set of the first Encyclopedia Britannica printed. So evidently he went a little wild in there, and he found a lot of names for his kids. All right, now look. Now we've gotten it this far. We found out that our own grandfather came over here and comes down from Elmira, Melpomene Dewey, and Marcus Parsons. All right? Now, Marcus Parsons was the son of Gideon Parsons Jr. Now we're talking about the year 1779 he was born. Now I don't know whether that means much to you, but do you know that in the 1770s we had the American Revolution and we fought to get away from the King of England, right? Well, you're looking at one of the guys that fought in that war, right here. Now this fella married somebody by the name of Clara Cleveland. Clara Cleveland. Now, did you ever hear of Cleveland? Like Cleveland, Ohio? Did you know there was a president by the name of Grover Cleveland? Did you know that? There was. I'm going to show you this. Look here. Clara Cleveland. Look at this line. Comes over here, and she was a daughter of Jedediah Cleveland. This is all just one step at a time, you see. And these are called generations. Jedediah Cleveland was married to somebody by the name of Lydia Merrill. Do you know what your Uncle Carl, this fellow with the big book's middle name is? It's Merrill. Carl Merrill Kunkel, and that's just exactly where it came from. And do you know how long ago? 1760 to 1990 is 130 years? Or 230 years? I think it's 2. I mean, we're talking about a lot of years, right? Okay. Now, we're very close to solving this whole problem. Because look over here. While we were talking about Reverend Timothy Dewey, all we have to do is climb this stair step of generations here, and we find that this is all a family of Deweys. Now, while we're talking about Marcus Parsons, we just have to climb this ladder here and find all the Parsons in this country. One generation at a time. This is the first one that ever hit this country, and this is the first Dewey that ever hit this country. And look what we got here. Did you ever hear of the Mayflower? Did you ever hear of Plymouth Rock? Did you ever hear about the Pilgrims landing? And boy, what a hard time they had. And the Indians and them got together and had the first Thanksgiving because they made it through the first winter. These were the Pilgrims. The leader of the Pilgrims, you know, was William Bradford. And do you know something? William Bradford had another William Bradford for a son, and this fella had Alice Bradford, and Alice Bradford had Lucy Fitch. See, she married. She was the daughter of Major James Fitch, and Lucy Fitch had William Cleveland, and William Cleveland had Jedediah Cleveland, who married this Merrill that Carl's named after. And all of a sudden, they've got a daughter, Clara, who's married to Marcus, who's married to Alpamina, his great-grandmother, and all of a sudden, we're to us. We're right down to us. And we started right up here with the Mayflower. You get that? Now, the thing I want to hit you with again is that only if your grandfather is in this list here can you claim this. No other Kunkels can claim this. It's true, and when I say Kunkel, this means you may be married to somebody whose name is not that, but your grandfather or mother was one of these. You get it? So it ain't for the world, kids. It ain't for the world. All right, now, this isn't all the story. Just because you know about Governor William Bradford don't mean he was the most important man in New England. He came here in 1620. 8 years later, a really strong, important batch of people showed up on one ship, and they were called Puritans. They were from England, but the Mayflower brought Pilgrims, and they were from England. Now, on that first boat here, the leader of those people was Governor Winthrop, just like this one's Governor Bradford. Now, with Governor Winthrop was two fellows. One of them was only 17 years old, and his name was Parsons. And Cornet means that he was a military man, a young fellow, military. Cornet, Joseph Parsons. Now, the Puritans were pretty fancy people over in England before they ever came over here. They were earls and counts, and they had money. The Pilgrims, they were dead broke even before they left. They really had to leave. There was no doubt about it. It was that or get hung. These were coming over here to make another fortune. But they also wanted religious freedom, and they wanted to get away from the king. They wanted to get away from him so much that they wanted to get away from the Church of England and everything that was going wrong over there. Now, here's the difference. The Pilgrims wanted to cling to the king. They had no intention of leaving the king. They just wanted to be able to worship with freedom, but they didn't want the common man to really have a say in the government. They still wanted to have, you know, almost a king right here. Well, thank goodness that didn't last. The Puritans, actually, these fellows right in here, set the stage for our own Constitution. This is religious freedom and representation in government. Now, they went through an awful lot of things, real tough stuff in order to get there. And I'm going to tell you about some of those things. Now, Cornet Joseph Parsons was on the first boat with Governor Winthrop, and he was the founder of a very important town out in the east called Northampton, Massachusetts. He went 100 miles through the wilderness and established this little settlement. And he locked up the fur business. Boy, every mink they killed, every coon they killed, every bear they killed had to go through him. And then he would ship it out of the country to England, see? And he also imported laces and he imported silks. Everything those poor people, those other people around him had to buy or wear or eat, Joseph Parsons sold them to him. So he was getting pretty important, all right? So Joseph was along the Connecticut River. You ought to see it. It's beautiful out there. But he was the first one. He had a son that was killed by an Indian right out in their backyard. Now his home is still in Northampton, Massachusetts, and it's now the headquarters for the Historical Society up there. The very home he lived in is up there, right? Okay, now look. He had a son, Esquire Joseph Parsons. Esquire means lawyer. That's what it meant then. Okay, Joseph Parsons. Then they had Daniel, and then they had Daniel Parsons Jr., then they had Gideon Parsons, and all of a sudden, we're down in this area here, which we really claim. You remember Marcus Parsons, all right? Okay, now look here. At the same time, don't forget, this guy Dewey came on the same boat this one did. And these two fellows came only 8 years after this one came. Dewey, this was something else.
Wallace?
Yeah.
Come 8 years after which one?
After the Pilgrims.
Okay, I
Right.
missed that.
Okay.
You Set back
Oh, I'm
there,
glad you-
just a little further too. Part. There, that's plenty.
Got
That's
it?
plenty, yeah.
All right. Now, Thomas Dewey is known today as the settler. They came to him. Now, these fellows were in what was called the Massachusetts Bay Colony. It was set up in England before they ever got here. Am I getting too wordy? Is this interesting at all? Well, you know, I'm so deep in this that I just go on and on. So I'm going to tell you about this. Thomas Dewey was sitting with he already owned property. I mean, it was just a couple of years after they settled, he already had a house of some kind. But he was over there in Salem, Massachusetts, right on the water, right where they had landed, and some Indians came over to see him. Out of the wilderness, here came these Indians. There were two of them, and they needed help. They said there were a lot of Indians causing them trouble, and they really needed help. Would they come inland and make a village, settle a village? Well, they did. So this guy and about 12 other people, they didn't have horses then. The horses were all in South America and Spain. They hadn't been imported yet. They weren't horses. They were oxen. But they didn't need oxen to travel 100 miles through the trees. Undoubtedly, they walked. So 11 guys and one woman. And we don't know much about her except he ended up marrying her. And she was already a widow. But they went through the trees and the winter, which means there must have been in New England a lot of snow, and they went 100 miles inland on that same Connecticut River that this guy owned all the furs on, right? And they had to wait until spring before they could make their settlement, and they dug holes in the bank of that river and lived in those holes until the winter was over, with Indians all around. You got another charter, you will get one, that shows the little fort that these people lived in. But anyway, after Thomas Dewey was Josiah Dewey, Nathaniel, and there were 4 Nathaniel Deweys. And when we run out of Nathaniels, we find ourselves with old Reverend Circuit Rider, with all the kids with the funny names, right? So you see what we've got here. From the very first days of this country, we've got the Deweys and the Parsons and good old Bradford. Now, would you believe that it took 150 years after this for the Kunkels to show up? And how did they show up? He come over to fight these guys. He was a soldier he got paid to be a soldier. And in those days, being a soldier of the king was almost like being a slave. He was bought. He was sold by his own king of Germany to the king of England. He was sold. And they were shipped over he was shipped over with two of his brothers. And old Henry came over here in his uniform to fight off the American Revolution that these guys had started. And he wasn't kidding around. Until he got over here, and he got captured. He got captured down Trenton, New Jersey, just outside of Philadelphia. And after he got captured, he began to find out he kind of liked the people over here. So he found himself, after they let him out, somehow they let him out, I don't know. But he found himself down in Pennsylvania in a place called York County, Pennsylvania. And he met a guy by the name of Kleinfelder. Well, Kleinfelder was having an awful hard time paying his taxes. And of course, this was primitive days. These guys, this was real rough living. Boy, we got it easy today. But this fella, Kleinfelder, was pretty broke, but he had a lot of land. But he couldn't pay his taxes, which meant in those days you had to pay taxes to the King of England. See, we still weren't free of that English king. So you know what? This guy, Henry Kunkel, who really still had the German name. It was Johann Heinrich Kunkel, right? I'm an actual soldier. You can just see him now. Yeah. And he came across Kleinfelder, who was broke at the time but had lots of land. And this guy, Henry Kunkel, had a money belt on him. And he was carrying around enough money to help this Kleinfelder pay the king off and pay off what was owed on his own body here. This guy was in debt. Henry Kunkel was in debt to the king. And they cleared it up. Do you know what he got for that? He got half of Kleinfelder's land and his daughter. And that's how Henry Kunkel started in this country. Now, do you know that Elizabeth Kleinfelder was the daughter of a lady called Apollonia, and she was an Indian princess. And an Indian princess was the daughter of a chief. And he was the chief of the Susquehanna tribe. There's a Susquehanna River that runs right down through the middle of Pennsylvania. And so she was the daughter of an Indian princess. We don't mind that at all. And I'll tell you something, you look at some of the old pictures of the Kunkels, right up to some of the present day, and you can see some Indian. The color of their eyes, you know, the shape of their faces. Why, old Carl's got a ruddy complexion back there. Some of the Kunkels have always had that ruddy complexion, right? Okay, now look here. Now this is a much shorter story. If we'd never found out about these things, this would be our whole story right here. And yet it's still 150, it's still what, 1750, 90, it's 250 years old in itself. These guys here get it close to 300 years. We got Henry, then Henry Kunkel II. That big book that Uncle Carl's got, this is all the descendants, all the kids that came from Henry Kunkel II. That's all that book contains. None of this rest. Just his kids, and then he had a batch of kids, and one of them was Jacob Kunkel. Now, Uncle Carl and I today visited a cemetery not far from here, where the tombstone is of Jacob Kunkel. Now, that's close to home here now, because everything from here on happened in this county since 1840. All right? And they were here about 4 years after this became a county. This was Indian territory called the Indian Plat Purchase. It was 6 counties, of which one of these was Holt. You get it? This is Holt County. And old Jacob Kunkel, they came out of Pennsylvania into Ohio, And Jacob was born in Ohio along with a whole batch of other people who are in that book. And we get down to Benjamin Franklin, and we got a picture of him today. Are you running out of tape?
No, I had to clear my throat, but if you scoot
Oh,
back,
I'm
when you get to this corner over here,
yeah, I'm covering it up with my elbow.
run
too.
his parts out there. That'd be perfect.
Yeah, good. All right, well now look, what do I want to tell you here? Old Henry was in Ohio, and he left Pennsylvania to get to Ohio. This is Henry II. Do you know how he did that? He did that with a wagon full of 11 kids. Did you hear me? What do we got in this room? 1, 2, 3, 4, and she's carrying one. They're in a covered wagon with 11 kids. And you know what? The mother was about to have another one. And when they got to Ohio, she had the 12th child. And those 12 children are in that big book that Carl's got, and all of their descendants. And that's us. Right? Because then we get to Leif Kunkel. And you must have heard of your great-grandfather Leif Kunkel. And if you haven't heard of Uncle Carl Kunkel by now, something wrong. And if you haven't heard of Chester Kunkel, there's something wrong. And his father Raymond, right? So where do we end up? Very simple. That this little cluster of people, of which you are one, can claim everything on here. And we know it's true because everything is verified. Now I'm going to add just a little bit to this because the charts that I end up sending you will probably have it on. And I'm going to tell you what it is. You'll find it on the chart. This lady right here is picked out. Her name is Hepzibah Lyman. And it's through her that we go back to the year 714. I've got every person beyond here. To the year 714. Okay? And I think I'll have them on your chart. All right? And the other one will be Jacob, whose tombstone we saw today right here outside of Oregon. He was married to Julia Ann Acton. And Julia Ann Acton, I will probably have the list, which continues it just like these, to the year 1300 to King Edward I of England. So let me tell you something, the blood that's running through your veins is pretty good stuff. Right? I think that's all.
Was there one real bad, ill-humored Kunkel?
Oh, undoubtedly.
Well, I just want to know where Drew fits in. I don't know where he's at now. Where's Drew, Ann?
He's right here.
Well, show him. He's got to be a descendant of the baddest one there is.
Well, I tell you what he's probably showing is that there's probably never been a batch of people in the city.
Here, wait. Okay, now it's on.
What do you say?
How did the first Kunkel get here?
How'd he get here? He got here with a big sailing ship full of soldiers.
Well, where'd his name come from?
His name comes from Germany. His mother and father, we think, their name was Gottlieb, and the mother, I'm not sure of the name Kunkel.
How'd that come from?
Oh, well, now, you see, if we carry this on far enough, we get right back to Adam. Do you understand this? Adam, remember, you know in your Bible? Mm-hmm. Adam was the first man. Do you know that it's all worked out, the genealogy of Jesus Christ? Do you know this? Right on back to Adam. Do you know that? Right? Come on now. It's true. Every last one of them. Now then, you ask a good question. Now you get up to Jesus Christ. Do you remember Pontius Pilate and some of those people and how they crucified Jesus? And what a terrible time the Romans gave him over there in Jerusalem? Remember that? That's called the Roman Empire, the reign of Caesar. It was. And you know how long it lasted? Well, it lasted about 800 years. Right? Now, the Roman Empire included the whole world at that time, which was, you know, Europe and that, and all of it, and it included England. There is an awful lot of the early Roman roads. There are still Roman roads in England. Yeah. Okay, now, when the Roman Empire was finally all done, and it got broken up. It got broken up into the King of Italy, kings in France, kings in Germany, and the year was 700 A.D. after Christ, right? Okay, now, this list that I'm going to give you outside of here, that you'll find up here, starts at 700. It starts after the Roman Empire and takes on down right through. So you see, this doesn't stop anywhere. It only has a beginning. It has its beginning with Adam.
But how did they just make up their name?
No, it's all recorded. The Bible is a history book too, you know. The Bible is the most accurate history book that'll ever be written. You know there's a book of Numbers? Have you ever seen the book of Numbers? That's about the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. You look at that book. It will tell you every person and who had a son. It can be pretty boring reading, let me tell you. But that is a genealogy. It's all in there. How about that? But this is a little tiny genealogy. You see, we've got a little tiny place in this earth, in this world. But we know what it is. The reason we know what it is right here, because we found it out. Do you know that an awful lot of people haven't got the slightest idea who their grandfather was? My own wife doesn't know who her great-grandfather was or anything before that. And you think it doesn't concern her? Yeah, you bet. It makes her mad to think I got so much here. She gets very mad at me every once in a while. But you ask an awful good question. Now you see, there's no end to it this way until Jesus comes back. Now I'm going to tell you, this is true. That's when it ends. But until then, there is no end going this way. But we know where it began. So we take a little chunk and we say, that's ours. If your grandfather is in here, then you can claim this. All right? I think that's enough history for one night.
That's real good.
Tell Wallace thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Kunkel name mean?
I can't hear you.
What does the Kunkel name mean?
Mean? Oh. Oh, that's good. The Kunkel name means, the best way to explain it is they were weavers of cloth, weavers in the Alps. The name describes their occupation. Now, what it actually means is distaff or spindle, which is a part of a loom. Or of, you know, in early America we had a spinning wheel. Well, that little part up here that they take the yarn off of and it spins around, that is the distaff. It's the spindle, and that's part of, and that's what the name means. And I'll tell you, like I told you before, that down in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where the Amish are, and out in Ohio, where the Amish are, these are Germans, they have a room upstairs that is called the Kunkel Stube. And Stube means room, and Kunkel means weaving, and weaving room. That's where they make their carpets, make their cloth, and all that. So, we were weavers. Okay?